Hello, and welcome to today's Skill Up session from DevOps Institute and PeopleCert, the best DevSecOps practices for maintaining cloud security. The cloud has pushed the frontier of technology, helping companies reduce time to market and launch new businesses and services around the world. However, it's also introduced new threats and cybersecurity challenges. The cloud has extended our security perimeter, introduced new shared responsibilities, and increased the pace at which risks are introduced to our application landscape. Luckily, DevSecOps can help us address these concerns. Hi, I'm Sean D. Mack. I'm a transformational technology leader, author of the DevSecOps Playbook, cybersecurity consultant, and former CIO and CISO of Wiley. And I'll be your moderator for today's event. I am very privileged to be joined by an amazing panel of experts today, including James Leone, Trace Bannon, Guillermo Martinez, Rahul Raji, and Darwin Sanoy. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Thank you all so much for being here today. Now, before we get started, I want to let our audience know that this program is live and being recorded, so you can view it again on demand. Also, there are chat and QA boxes on the right side of your screen to communicate with general audience in chat and post questions to the speakers. So why don't we jump right in and get started with introductions? Trace, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
Well, we'll see if my mute button responds appropriately as we go here. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Trace Bannon. I'm a software architect and an engineer. I spend a lot of time with DevOps, DevSecOps, digital transformation, because I need a way to get the software, that value out into the production environment. I work primarily, most recently, the last couple of years, supporting the US federal government. So some really massive and complex problems. A lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me today.
Great to have you here, Trace. Darwin, over to you.
My name is Darwin, and I'm a principal solutions architect in GitLab's alliances area, which means that I work a lot with our cloud vendors to make sure that folks' experience with GitLab and the cloud is smooth and seamless.
Great. Guillermo.
Okay, I was checking the muting of the microphone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, even maybe. I'm Guillermo Martinez. I'm a technology architect, background in software engineering. During my entire career, I've been working on DevOps transformations for enterprise companies. And of course, for me, always the part of security has been embedded in DevOps. I don't see DevOps without security, but of course it became a trend recently, a couple of years back. And during my entire career, I've been facing things around the security domain when we are talking about DevOps.
It's great. Thanks so much. Great to have you here. Rahul, last but not least.
Hey, hi. Yeah. Hey, hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Miragi. I'm currently working as a DevOps lead in Syngenta. So I'm based out in Pune, India. Syngenta is an agtech company. So currently we are building applications for agriculture products, right? And my experience carries out in 10 plus years of experience in DevOps and DevSecOps implementing. And over the years, I have helped developers, mentored some teams also to how to implement security best practices around cloud native technologies. And thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I see our last panelist has just got here, just in the nick of time. Welcome, James. Great to have you here with us as well. We're just going around and doing a round of introductions. If you could just take a moment to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Sean. My name is James Leone. As you can see from the picture behind me, I am on the West Coast here. So good morning to everybody. I work at IBM as a principal lead for the Azure cloud practice, focusing obviously on cybersecurity, a lot of AI, and certainly a good cross-cut of Azure within IBM Consulting. So our emphasis is finding the right technologies for the clients, not just necessarily the IBM technologies, which often are the right technologies, but it's about finding the right ones. And then more importantly, the cultural and the business transformations. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today with the lens of DevSecOps. So thank you for having me here.
Great to have you here early in your morning. Appreciate that, James. And it's great to see such a wide distribution of folks from around the world. So I think before we get into really the meat of DevSecOps and cloud security and how you apply it, one of the ways I think about this as a CISO is, how does cloud fundamentally differ from legacy or perimeter or on-prem based security? And so that's the first question I want to pose to the panel here is, how is cloud security fundamentally different? Because I think in answering that, we can answer how our approach needs to change too. And Darwin, if you don't mind, I'd love to kick it over to you for a first take on that.
Sure. Yeah, in my experience, I've had a long legacy in on-prem environments and on-prem networking. And when I started to add cloud to the portfolio, one of the things that is really important to consider is the architectural opportunity. So in on-prem environments, we've had a presume or a secure perimeter approach to the network. So we create a secure perimeter. We assume that all security will be applied at that level. And then within the network, we're free to do anything. And in some ways, this is unavoidable in that we have a lot of end user devices within that. So we mix our end user devices with our server side computing. But when we come to cloud, we have the opportunity, because A, we don't have end user devices, and B, it's a whole new environment, to do a presumed breach approach. And this is where there is no given conversation between two systems that is not explicitly allowed by firewalling, and everything else is disallowed. So I think one of the things we have to think about is not just concepts, there's a lot of additional concepts to consider, but this fundamental idea of where do you start with security is a great opportunity for organizations to roll back and say, hey, let's presume that there's a bad actor in the system. Now, how do we minimize their ability to make their way through the systems? And so it's a whole different approach. You'll find that if you're familiar with CIS benchmarks, or you start there for your Amazon account or your Azure account or your Linux machines inside of those cloud accounts, that you will have that presumed breach approach built into those particular standards.
That's great. That's great. Guillermo, would love to hear from you. What do you think are some of the fundamental differences there?
Well, from my side, I work on-premise domain like 10 years ago during a period of 3 years in an environment that was not even exposed to the internet for most of the machines, but only the production machines. And what I noticed, the main difference between when we talk about cloud versus on-premise is on the cloud, the machines themselves, the hardware is going to be covered already by the cloud provider most of the times. So you focus mainly on the application and everything that runs on this domain, while some other things are not that covered anymore. However, when we talk about on-premise or small data centers, I would add it there as well. We need to take care as well of the hardware. I was even going sometimes to a place near to the airport to change certain devices and certain hard drives and things like that. Somebody can go even unplug your cables because there is a lot of access for the people there. So yeah, you need to cover certain extra things when you are running on-premise, on top of course all application and everything in the domain of software that runs there. But yeah, the bare bone domain, the metal bare bones, it's something that you need to cover as well. And when we talk about the cloud, it's something that you don't really need to be taken care of.
Yeah. Trace.
Ultimately, what I'm hearing both Darwin and Guillermo speak to is that it is the same and different. And yes, I know that sounds like consultant speak. All of the same challenges that we originally had are still there, but we also need to understand the responsibilities and make sure that we understand what our companies, what our corporations are responsible for, and those things that the cloud provider is responsible for. And there are varying degrees of service licensing agreements, right? They're very different, and you have to make sure that you truly understand where is the line of demarcation between what you're responsible for and what you hold others accountable for. So that's often something that we overlook until there's a breach.
Yeah. I mean, as Guillermo pointed out, there's certain things we don't have to worry about, but then there's a whole bunch of things we do have to worry about. And as you point out, Trace, the things we don't have to worry about, we still kind of have to worry about, right? Because we do now have that shared responsibility, and so we do need to be very cognizant of who's sharing that responsibility. That's great. And I think that really lays the foundation as we get into our conversation. I'd love to hear from our panel, what are some of the threats that are concerning us most? So what are the threats specifically for cloud environments that folks are most concerned with today? And maybe Rahul, if you could kick us off on this one, would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I think the cloud has been like a revolutionizing technology, but it has brought its own problems, and something that security teams, they have to upgrade their knowledge. And I think role access management is, I think, somewhat critical, where to authenticate with the provider, the cloud provider, you have to have some set of tokens, but these tokens can be stolen, and they can be accessed by anyone if somebody gets hands on these tokens, right? So I think access management is one where security has to be how do you establish the zero trust security, right? So every time you need to authenticate via something. So while SSO is great, but it doesn't work for everyone, right? So I think access would be one thing. The other thing is lack of threat modeling around the cloud infrastructure. As in terms of physical infrastructure, we had this threat modeling where we could give those test cases, but when it comes to cloud, I think the threat modeling is that it's not very much gained that much of let's say value, because even still the companies, I think they do not have a plan of action to how to create a suspect, like some test cases around threat model, like how to identify bad actors from good actors, and how to eventually inject these cases into their pipelines, right? So something I think that is missing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And James, I mean, you have a unique vantage working across multiple customers. What are you seeing as some of the top cloud threats?
And I piggyback on Tracy's point earlier to the first question about the differences in security, and say those third parties, the third party trust. That's a big difference because you need to pick your partners right. And if we're talking cloud, there's traditional cloud IaaS and PaaS, right? Your Azure, your AWS, your GCP, but then you also have so many SaaS providers popping up every day, right? Whether it's an AI chatbot that could be leaking your chat history, quite high profile there, or other. And the spectrum and size and maturity of these companies really varies. But if you're an attacker, I mean, jackpot, why attack an individual company if you can attack a provider company which has data for a lot of other individual companies, and now you really have something to go with. So I'd say that's a big one. And what could you do about that? Obviously, attestations are the start, right? Making sure, here's what you do. Do you do what you say you do? Do you meet maybe our checklist, or what are the defined compliance checklists you do? How do you get audited? How do you get reviewed? And then what's the track record of some of the people, right? This is just old school detective work. What do you have a history of leading companies that are getting breached all the time? These kind of things are pretty big. Just because somebody has one black eye doesn't mean they're not good at managing cybersecurity. But if we see ongoing negligence, that's something you definitely want to be aware of. And to that same tone of the shared responsibilities, I'd say misconfigurations of your cloud, whether it's a SaaS, IaaS, or PaaS, right? What do you have for cloud security posture management? Because one of the big things about cloud, and Rahul said it's revolutionary in many senses, is you can get so many not traditional network data center management people to build out an environment, right? They're doing this through the cloud, which is awesome. However, they may not have that background, to understand what are the things they need to lock down, how do they need to secure everything. So configurations, cloud security posture management. And the last thing I'd add before handing it off is the general feeling and assumption of users, consumers of your cloud-based applications, that they can access them from remote locations, not just your network itself. So, and the access, I can access them not just from any remote location, but even from any device. And so what does that mean to you? That means as the person responsible in managing this is you really have to account for a lot and potentially even lock down more depending on the application, because the device that's being used, has that device been compromised? Is it a trustworthy device from your perspective? So you have those user expectations. So those are three things that I would definitely add to the conversation. Why is it so complicated to deal with?
Yeah, go ahead, Trace.
Yeah, if I can add on to that and pull things together that I've heard from everybody. We're knitting things together these days. Years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I started to tell folks, we're all custom developers. We love it. And we're going to do less and less and less of that what I would consider that core traditional custom dev. And we're knitting together things. It used to be that I would go and buy a rules engine and install it in my data center and knit that into my solution. Now, we want to be exceptionally decoupled so that we can use that scalability, right? That distribution of the cloud. It's beautiful. And at the same time, that means APIs plus some APIs and some more APIs. And one of the biggest challenges is that whether you write the API yourself and you're serving it to yourself, or whether you're exposing it to others or consuming somebody else's, you've got to understand the trust posture of that API. And you have to be very explicit. To James's point, you got to know your data posture. How much data is going in? What are they doing with it? If I send you some numbers for a calculation, are you keeping those? Are you doing some kind of model training on the other side that I don't know about? There's a lot more questions to answer now, to ask now, than there were before. So it's getting more complex, and we kind of have to be detectives. It's almost like managing money. Where's that penny going? Who has a hold of that penny? How much interest does it have? How is that penny getting transferred from here to there? Like it can be overwhelming actually for organizations, especially as they're first going into this. And I think that's where you start to see some of the breaches, because there's so much to think about, right? Yeah. Starting small. I know later on we'll ask some questions about how do you start to apply DevSecOps principles to cloud to help you. I would say always look at what's your risk posture and what's your quality posture, and try and figure out kind of the smallest first step so you can really nail it. Because I think one of the things that James brought up is we're all moving to cloud. We're grabbing onto it as quickly as possible. We're migrating so many our apps there. We're migrating our data there. We're having it control our trust on our behalf. Man, that's a big attack surface.
Yeah. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And the pace is really challenging to keep with the pace of change. We are, everything's ephemeral and moving at a million miles an hour, and we need to keep up with that. And that, I think, is a great lead in, Trace, to our next question, which is a little bit about how do we begin to address these threats, right? And I would love to think about what are the most critical DevSecOps practices for cloud security. How are we using the principles of DevSecOps to address some of these threats? And Darwin, maybe you could kick us off.
Sure. Yeah. I think, DevSecOps, we say shift left a lot. But the shift left is largely left undefined. So people think of, let's do security scanning earlier. Let's do more visibility earlier. But it's really important to make sure that shift left is empowered so that developers are able to have what they need when they need it. This also has really fits into the frictionlessness that we need. So when security is friction full, developers resist it. And when it's late, developers have already completed all their integration work. So it's really important to approach it with the right timing. So when all the parts are still out on the bench, so to speak, the developer's working on their functional code before they've merged to any shared branches. It also needs to have clear responsibility that developer is the one who may have introduced a new vulnerability. They love to be great craftsmen of their work. So if you show them, hey, there's a fault here in the software, then they'll address it. And we need a complete level of analysis at that point. So we need SAST scanning results and DAST scanning results, and any other results that we can collect. All of that needs to move all the way left right into the developer's feature branch. And then that way they can see the vulnerabilities they may have added to the code, and they are able to then take a look at that at a time when they're very willing and very open to addressing this. So doing it in this way and getting into that habit loop is what makes it frictionless. Developers already have a habit loop, and there's a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear that talks about the best way to onboard a new routine is to stick it into an existing habit loop. So if we can put all the way through vulnerability remediation right into that habit loop, collaboration, training, all inside of that habit loop, then we have a scenario where it feels frictionless to developers. We get better at DevSecOps maturity without growing other headcount in other areas of the organization. And the developers feel like development is a joy and addressing security is a normal standard thing.
But I believe that there's a little bit of a misconception there, Darwin, and that is my developers are not my security experts. They are security savvy, and they need to be, and we need to teach them secure development practices. As an architect, upfront, I need to be thinking about, and yes, I said upfront, there is some thinking that goes on before everybody starts to code. We need to be thinking about secure by design, secure in depth. But the reason I posted out the term no hobbyist is that what I constantly see is that we're thinking that shift left means that we dump it onto the developers, and that's really not the case. Shift left is start as early as possible. So if we're talking about security, it should be shift everywhere. Or I think I forget who said it recently. It said shift smart. I thought that was really, really great phrase. Shift smart.
I heard get shift done, Trace.
Like that too. But the point being, we have to be cognizant that I want to give my developers tools so that they can do scanning that they understand that we upskill them to do as early as possible, right? Defects as quickly as possible to get after that. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to have security experts that are involved. So we're not suddenly doing away with our security pros. So I'm going to go with that shift smarter, shift everywhere, and talk about upskilling my developers rather, with security, right? I need to teach them, they're builders. I need to teach them how to be breakers and to think, right, about the security risks that I may not have thought about before.
Yeah. And just to clarify, by empowered shift left, I do mean to shift all that tooling and on-demand training right up into that area. Also to shift the ability to collaborate. So it's interesting how we collaborate over code in other ways. And then when it comes to security, we devolve into emails and spreadsheets and spending 3 months realizing, oh, you addressed that vulnerability like 6 weeks ago. So yeah, absolutely. Empowered shift left, I mean that we bring everything to the developer at the time they have the parts on the bench that allows them to be enabled without becoming security experts. Because I totally agree with you. I think the other practice that's interesting is automation, and this is really not this is not ops side, but for a long time we've enabled scanners for instances. No one expects to know every possible vulnerability that could be on a given Linux box with a stack of runtimes on it. But a lot of the same organizations aren't quick to do cloud security scanning, account scanning. And it's the same problem. It's novel technology for those who are working with it, and it's very complex, and it's constantly being enhanced and changed. So there's new possibilities for new attack surface. So I think taking that kind of old approach of operational scanning that we use in instances, that should be instantaneously the new thing that we do in cloud accounts as well.
Yeah, that's great. Guillermo, what about you? What are some of the best DevSecOps practices that we can use to address?
Yeah, from my side, I think it's important that we need to recognize what type of company we're working on. Are we working on an enterprise, or we are working in a small company? Because of course, skills and amount of people and capacity is not going to be the same. Let's start with the small companies. I think that everything that a small company is doing in terms of DevSecOps should be done as well by the big companies, at least. And with the small companies, when we talk about DevSecOps, not just security as isolated domain, but DevSecOps, I think, as that we mentioned, pipelines. Pipelines they need to be there. You need to have a code scanning. You need to have a container if you work with container scanning. You need to have a proper quality gates there. So if something is going wrong, it should stop the delivery automatically. So I think those are the practices that you really need to ensure that they are there. Of course, the company and the developers needs to understand how these tools work and how to configure them properly and all these kind of things, which is something that is also important. But this is when we talk about small company, because of course we don't have that many capacity. We don't have obviously a lot of security experts, so we need to rely on what the tooling is telling us most of the cases. But then if we go into bigger organizations, enterprises, for sure you're going to have certain security department, cybersecurity department. So they are not going to build product most of the time. What they are going to do is to check that you are building the products or you are using the technologies in a secure manner. Well, they need to make sure that everyone is following the cloud security recommendations. Now, a good thing from the public cloud is that they provide you a lot of recommendations, and that makes things a little bit easier. They need to establish certain policies and practices that the company needs to follow, such as using certain domains, not using certain domains, ports, stuff like that. Next to that, I think it's an important activity when we talk about DevSecOps is to embed people of security into the teams, because DevSecOps as well, is about breaking silos. We should not forget about that, even it was, 8 years ago. Still about breaking silos. So this sec silo should be also incorporated in the teams that they are delivering value. Not as a person that you might contact from time to time, hey, please check that. But these security groups should be accountable as well about if the company is delivering value or not. And then when we are in a kind of like mature situation, especially big companies rather than small ones, we can go into practices more like a SRE. SRE can ensure that we are attacking ourselves, the company, because to be honest, if someone wants to hack you, they might be able to do that. So for instance, Amazon, they use this group of internal hackers that they attack themselves continuously, because it's the best way to see if you have some breach or not. So I think that will be kind of like the ultimate practice that you want to make it happen.
Yeah, red teaming can be a powerful tool there. Rahul, what about you? What are you seeing as some of the best practices we can apply?
Yeah, so I think the organizations that I have worked with have faced similar issues, like how do you break the silos that Gulben mentioned, because you have so many different teams working together, and how do you bring them into one, because you can have different security postures for your code scanning, for your infrastructure security, for your cloud security, and not each developer would be aware of those things, right? So how do you decide that which pipeline would follow? So I think it's very important for the companies to identify what kind of security risks they can adhere to, so that they have a basic standards, and they need to start breaking the pipelines immediately, because I think as we say, shift left, right? So I think it's because if you take too much time, then then you're not really shifting left. But I think it's very important for the companies to have a global policy which says that if you don't pass our quality standards, or let's say security standards, you need to break their pipeline so that they don't deploy to production and pose threats to you. So something very interesting, I think I have heard people are working on these concepts, just don't allow. So I think SREs can play a vital role here, where they can take additional responsibility of securities, these things. Those things are, I think, and most companies, they often forget about doing infrastructure scanning. We use IAC tools like CloudFormation templates, Terraform, but they really do not scan them, for any network security gaps, bridges, or so I think many companies have started following it, but still it's very low. So I think pipeline should be one thing that we should concentrate, and you should immediately start breaking those pipelines if you think they have some vulnerabilities on, instead of promoting them to prod because there is a business critical functionality to be delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. Trace, did you have something? I saw, okay.
I do, Sean. I have one thing. I've heard a lot of good information. We've danced around a lot of things, but there's one topic that I want to punch on the nose to make sure that it's very clear to the audience. We're going to punch this one on the nose. So regardless of the tools you have, right, code scanning tools, pipeline tools, these are very helpful tactics to help realize things, regardless of the teams, the processes you have, red teaming, all these amazing stuff that Guillermo's talking about. There needs to be a culture of good stewardship shared across the technology organization, the product development and technology organization. It's kind of like if you had a finance team in your company and they're like, we like doing all this stuff, but as far as having balance sheets that really balance, we're not, that's not our job. No, it needs to be understood that having security as a dimension of your product, one of the things it does and takes care of is imperative part of being a good steward in technology today. So I just wanted to pop that thing.
I'm going to double punch it on the nose because I truly believe that security is a quality attribute. So putting on my software architecture hat, so security is not a separate thing. So if you are going to deliver quality and value, you must deliver security. So it's not a separate thing over here. It's not a bolt-on. It's not an add-on. It's not completely separate. It's an indigenous part of everything that we do. Exactly to your point, James.
Absolutely. I do find it's interesting because, as someone pointed out earlier, security's always been part of DevOps, but somehow that seems to have been forgotten in many cases. But as others have pointed out here, if you build it in to how we work, if you build it into that responsibility model, you have a much better chance of making sure we're secure every day.
I don't know that it was forgotten per se. It is part of it is the cultural piece that James was talking about. How do we bring those folks together? I had an enterprise architecture team. I had architects. I had lines of business of developers, and trying to bring security in culturally was exceptionally difficult. Different funding streams. I had a situation where my security folks had licenses for certain scanning tools, and developers weren't even allowed to have that. So sometimes there are silos that take more to really break down, but you're spot on this whole thing. I will agree to say DevSecOps for one reason: makes people feel better.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's all, because it hasn't changed from what I personally hasn't changed. I've been working with integrated eligibility and child welfare and child support. Now I do some stuff with the DoD. Like, security's always been a part of everything I do, but I know that if you're a small startup and you're running fast, you might not be thinking about that as you're learning and doing and consuming really cool new PaaS or SaaS services. You're probably not thinking about that as the first thing on your list.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd just like to say too, it's easy to think of this as an enforcement and compliance paradigm, and that people must comply because it's necessary. And that's actually true, but frequently when we make something very palatable to people, we don't have to appeal to that motivation. There's experiments globally where they run ads that say 90% of people have paid their taxes. Have you? And all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of voluntary compliance because people are like, I want to be a good person too, right? So within development, software developers love to be expert craftspeople. And if we can get the right information and the right tooling to them at the right time that focuses on only the code they're changing, it appeals to their craftsmanship. That they don't want software defects, don't want security defects in their code any more than they want any other defect in their code. So I would just like to say that if organizations have been thinking about this in terms of enforcing compliance, enforcing people, and really think about the fact that people who build software love to be awesome craftsmen. How do you make the security of their software be a point of awesome craftsmanship?
Absolutely. So some great tips and ideas about how we can apply DevSecOps to improve and meet some of these challenges. Now, no tech conversation these days seems to be complete without the mention of AI. And I feel like we would be somewhat remiss if we don't at least touch on the subject. Certainly, this explosion in recent months of generative AI presents some real new threats, but it also presents some opportunities. So I would love to hear from our panel here on what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for cloud security and DevSecOps using AI and generative AI in particular. Trace, would love to turn to you to kick us off.
How many hours do we have? So there's so many things to talk about with this that I'm going to try and pick one thing. We'll see if that works. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we enable developers? Because we're talking about the entire value stream from idea to fielded production, right? We're not talking about only from code commit through an automation of a pipeline. We're talking more holistically, right? James brought that up. We're talking about the whole enchilada, so to speak. If I'm looking for ways to leverage AI, I can use it for help me with threat modeling, for example, but I can also use the different AI models to help me reduce the noise for the developers. So when there are defects, especially when there's security defects, and providing them guidance on how to fix and what to fix, we can leverage some of the tools. They're growing, they're getting better. We can leverage those tools to better prioritize which of the security defects should be addressed earlier, right? So if I'm looking at this from an architectural perspective, that's one of many ways. I'll throw a second one out there because I think a couple of folks on here work with ops as well. So I'm dev, married to ops, and I can tell you that from an operations perspective, the ability to analyze all of that data, right? The ability to not just concatenate it, but to be truly able to analyze it both proactively and reactively is massively important. And we're just going to see that this corpus of data that we have that's growing by the day for operations is fodder, absolute fodder for using AI. Over.
Absolutely. Guillermo, what about you? What are some of the applications and opportunities here? Oh, you're on mute. Too much to say.
Okay, now it is.
Got it.
Yeah, no. So what I was saying while I was on mute, that is still very hard to know because all this AI trend is becoming something now, although it's quite evolved, but still it's not evolved at all. No, from my side, I think hackers can use it for sure to hack you out. I'm sure that if you start going into AI and start asking things on how to hack certain places, certain things, you will get a lot of insights and knowledge on how to do that without having to be an expert of computer science. So I think that's on the attacking side. But also these kind of things can be used in the, let's say, defense on the security part. We mentioned today that it's impossible that all companies have a lot of cybersecurity experts. Well, I think, especially if you're a small company, just go into AI solutions and start asking, what can I do in terms of basic security practices? What can I do in order to, protect my, cloud environment if I'm running here or there, my software applications? These kind of things will be good already. Then if we talk about software development, directly software development, and you are using AI for that, as it could be ChatGPT or Copilot, I think having prompts of, hey, I want code that is secure, that will help you out a lot. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, most of the DevOps tools now, they are starting to incorporate AI functionalities that will help you out to detect certain issues, certain security breaches in the code, as could be like, okay, you are exposing certain things, you are putting certain keys there that you should not, based on the predictions on all the sources, you can understand that you are going in a really bad path. So at the end, AI is really starting in this world, and you can use it in different manners, both for taking action from the tooling point of view or getting insights.
Some huge opportunities there. Although we have to contend with the fact that a lot of the models aren't necessarily writing secure code yet. And so I think there's an opportunity there, but we're not there yet, right? We have to get better models that are trained on these security paradigms that write secure code.
Well, and actually we see the opposite is happening right now. There is a proliferation by the nefarious actors. They're having fun with this. If you imagine that we're going out and playing with ChatGPT and we're having it tell us chicken jokes or what have you, right? We're having it generate some code, but we're not taking our work code. We're taking our private code, right? If you think about that, we used to say script kiddies were those kids who were left alone, but they had a lot of time. You don't need to invest mega hours anymore to be a bad guy. And if you think about ChatGPT, there's an alternative to it called Worm GPT, and it essentially has all the guardrails taken away. And it's not illegal to use it, but the good guys are using it and the bad guys are using it. So I can poison your models. And so if I really want to do something nefarious, I'm going to start by putting out information. I'm going to start by putting out code bit by bit. It's actually not good. And I'm going to train the model to do bad things. And there are examples now today surfacing about that. So you really have to be super duper careful. Add that on to what James said earlier about attestations and S-bombs. Yeah, we got the makings of a big mess potentially if we're not really careful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I wanted to point out too that with DevSecOps, the DevOps itself recast software delivery as the infinity symbol, right? And this pipeline of infinite pipeline of customer value that we keep try to keep it rolling. If you look at statistics on how much time a developer who's actually the dedicated coder person in the infinity symbol spends on coding, it's not that high. And then if you take that across all roles it takes to deliver DevOps, the amount of time spent coding is low. So the amount that Gen AI specifically can affect is fairly small. But let's say we quadrupled the productivity and legitimately we got great code out of that. Well, it's kind of like ballooning that one part of that infinity symbol, making it 2 or 3 times as wide. But if you think about it, the rest of the symbol has not been enhanced for throughput. And so we're going to run into, and this is being pointed out even at the entire economic level with AI, is that we run into a throughput problem because we still do need human review. So Gen AI is not going to relieve us of the people, process, and technology focus. For instance, if you try to do migration coding and no one in the organization knows the frameworks that the AI is generating with, who's to say whether the code's secure, whether it's best practice? And so the code review part still needs to happen. And we need AI there to help us with that, to improve the throughput and quality outcomes there. And as the code continues to move down the cycle into operations, we're going to need the AI capabilities throughout the whole cycle to see net benefit to the entire capability. Unfortunately, a lot of folks, when they try to approach DevOps and Agile, of course, they're always thinking of speed alone, as opposed to agility, meaning speed and maneuverability, right? And so I think it's important to understand that the Gen AI part is a part of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. And it's not going to do away with the need for human experts to be the code reviewers and to be the ones ensuring that the code that's coming out of the Gen AI, just like code coming out of a junior person, we need to make sure that we're helping them grow in their capability to generate and to assure quality outcomes. Gen AI, you can kind of think of them as Gen AI as an intern. It's going to need some helpful oversight.
So I'm going to add something to that. I think it was with Techstrong Group. I was invited to provide some information like about a month and a half ago around AI and the SDLC. And why does that matter? Because DevSecOps is applying it to the SDLC. We're looking at that holistically. If you take the infinity loop, I'm not a fan of the infinity loop, by the way, because it makes it look as though we have just sequential things that we somehow knotted up somehow. AI, ML, and generative AI. I jokingly call those the sexy trifecta. All 3 of those things can be applied to each and every aspect and are being applied to each and every aspect. We can use a generative AI to help us with requirements. So I can take a transcript of Sean and I talking, and I can feed that in, and I can actually generate epics and user stories. I can feed in bodies of requirements and look for gaps. There are tremendous amount of refactoring. If I can train it on my code base, I can actually have it help me with refactoring. I can generate test cases. A lot of tools right now still doing a crappy job with test case generation, but there's no part of the complete SDLC. There's no part of it that we're not going to see the sexy trifecta touch. It's already touching it. The maturation, to your point, Darwin, is where we have the challenges. You can't take the humans out of the loop. We can jumpstart, but remember, to your point, we're going to get a cognitive overload that just completely destroys the mid and senior technologists because they're the people who have to do the reviews. So we have to be really, really compassionate about that right now. Over.
Yeah.
Trace, I gotta jump in because I loved your point about talking about developing personas, right? To help inform your requirements, right? Telling the AI, here's the person you are, give a little context. You're setting your context. Then effectively, you're having a conversation with a virtual, non-existent persona. The same can be done to develop the persona of different kind of attackers and help you brainstorm as a team. So we talked about opportunities. And we've mentioned so many different opportunities, but this is a big one that's very here and now. I know it isn't necessarily as exciting as someone's creating some bot that's attacking and thwarting attacks, and we've got these robots virtually battling each other in the cyberspace. But just being able to leverage those personas and having some feedback loop with generative AI, it can bring in some hallucinations, which are total junk. That's why you're the human. But it can also bring in some good inspirations depending on the model and the breadth of activities it's done, and can even help with some of the threat modeling that Raul was talking about, right? It can help coach you along the way in a very detailed manner, and it doesn't get tired. And you kind of charges by the hour, but it's pretty cheap.
My friend Shannon Leitz, she was one of the folks who actually came up with the word. At least it's accredited for DevSecOps back in the day. Regardless, she is adamant and has just really pounding on my head that when you're doing your personas for your organization, it has to have all of those threat actors. 1000% to your point, James. Punch in the nose for that one. A good punch in the nose, right? That's
good punch in the nose. Love it. And Rahul, before we move on to the next question, would love to get your take on what are some of the biggest challenges and threats from AI?
Yeah, so I would like to speak on the opportunity first, like what is the opportunity that AI brings. So I think AI can really help, like the SecOps teams to do like an audit kind of stuff, like who is accessing your network, who's accessing your application. So it can help you to detect some unwanted traffics, and kind of use a non-trusted users. So apart from that, I think on the log management perspective, I think we have not talked about it, but I think developers tend to print everything, right? Console.log is a beautiful thing to do, right? But yeah, so I think we print sensitive tokens, sensitive usernames, passwords, all those things, and and we really do not care because we think logs are stored in our systems, and we really do not. But I think who is accessing those logs at what time, and are they using it for right purposes, right? So I think AI can really help you to get an overview of those kind of data. The threat I see, as Gloomer said, yeah, it can be a good boy or a bad boy attacking your system, right? So in terms of how people are using Gen AI, what kind of data they're feeding. So if you're using a private instance, it's hopefully it's good. But if you're using a public instance, I think hackers can really get how your cloud security looks like on most of the organizations, and they can really have a better framework to attack. So I think the common pattern that we see around organizations using same sort of cloud security, like NACL security groups and all, but I think hackers can exploit that if there is a vulnerability found in these security groups of NACL. Right. So that would be a challenge for, I think, the cloud providers basically to how to serve better.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Lots of challenges, lots of opportunities as well. I do want to take a quick minute to answer one of the audience questions. I don't think we'll get to. There's a few out there, but I did want to answer this one. Marcin S asks, you talk about basically linting, SaaS, DAST, IAC, less privilege, rule, collaborations, etc. Is the chaos engineering brings value added to security? So what can we use the concepts of chaos engineering for security? And Guillermo, I think you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned not chaos engineering exactly like that, but it's quite similar when I mentioned Amazon. Well, for the audience, if you never heard about chaos engineering or the chaos monkey, because it's kind of like an advanced practice, it was developed by Netflix. It's basically a tool that attacks their own infrastructure systems, tearing down production system down. So they enforces the company to act upon that. So they really need to create resilient systems that they can support any kind of attack. So as I mentioned, referring to Amazon, they have a group of engineers, but not only Amazon, obviously. So for instance, the Chaos Monkey coming from Netflix. It's a group of engineers that they attack themselves. They are kind of like ethical hackers. Mm-hmm. So at the end, there is this group of really good engineers. What they do is just attack their own company all the time, like tearing down systems, seeing if there are certain breaches that they can access. So really, basically trying to destroy the company that is paying the salary. I think it's a great practice in terms of security because, to be honest, that's the best way to detect any issue, any incident. You can prevent a lot, and you can put a lot of practices around, and you might think like, okay, I'm totally covered. But it's true that sometimes, especially when we talk about technology, that there are that many new things, you cannot cover everything. So the best thing to cover all the possibilities is by having certain good people that they are continuously attacking you, so they discover the issues that you are facing. So then you need to address them and fix them. But also it brings this culture of, hey, I really need to create robust solutions. So these guys, the Chaos Monkey guys, the Simian army, cannot really attack me, or they cannot tear down my system. So I do think that it's a great practice. I think it's quite advanced practice that requires good people and a good team around it. But yeah, if you are a big company enterprise, I think it's a good thing to start doing. Probably if you are part of a big company, or you have been having certain ethical hackers around, but these guys are a bit more extreme.
Yep, absolutely. And I do know there's a book written on the topic, Security Chaos Engineering, by Kelly Shortridge and Aaron Reinhardt, and I'll post that to the chat if folks are interested in finding out more. We're almost getting towards the end of the hour. I do want to make sure that we leave the audience with some actionable guidance here. Seems like the challenge is vast, and there are so many points of solution. So I would love to talk about, what are some of the first steps companies can take to implement DevSecOps for their organizations, and maybe leave them with something that we can start doing today or tomorrow. And Trace, would love to start with you there. James, I'll get to you next.
Okay.
Oh, you've got background noise, so we should start with no, we can't hear you.
That's okay. I'll tap dance a little bit while Trace gets everything else.
Perfect.
And I'll do a little Aikido with Guillermo's point. And the last topic was on chaos engineering, right? Why chaos engineering? To improve resiliency and keep your product and your system available, right? You're breaking down, killing certain microservices. Does everything come back alive? Availability. So for those developers out there, this is where I'm going. Availability. If you want to make good friends with your folks in security, make sure that you understand the CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the pillar stones of security and the way things can go wrong, right? It's a very fundamental, foundational way that we look at things. Why am I saying that? Because it comes to the first point. What are the first steps? First step is kind of understanding your peers and your brethren, right? We talked about that culture of shared stewardship. So developers understanding what is CIA, starting that conversation with a security person. Now you're starting to build that bridge, break down those silos, and go with the culture. So that to me is a key first step. And then the conversations can happen from there, whether it's over Slack, Zoom, what have you, or even in the break room if you come into the office.
That's a great point. Trace, do we have you back?
Well, we're going to try. Can you hear me now?
Hey, there we go.
Yay. All right. Tech that didn't force a full reboot. Hooray. Hooray. There were so many good things that James just hit on, as well as Guillermo a little bit earlier. When I think about threat modeling, I think about it as a team sport, at least to introduce people both sides of things to come together. Adding on additional, when you do your Mad Libs of your user stories, adding on to additional security threat. What is the threat? What piece of data do I want you to protect me from, right? As a user, I need to submit my application so I can get heating oil. This data I need protected from this bad guy. Another good thing that you can do. At the end of the day, the most important thing, I believe, as an architect is having a secure software development framework in place, right? This is holistically talking about how are we going to address every aspect of the SDLC coming together as security, as quality engineering, as our operations organization, as our developers, as our engineers, as our architects, as our business users, having the conversation about every piece, every segment of the SDLC. You're going to see places where everybody's eyes bulge open. They didn't realize that that was a risk. That is going to help you to get started with the shared responsibility that James brought up. So I'm adamant that it has to do with humans, and some more humans.
Yep, absolutely.
I just want to comment, Sean, that if in some of the pictures we have of the DevSecOps symbol, we have security surrounding the entire thing. And I would make a claim that AI belongs in the same place. But more importantly, I'd make a claim that things that are in that place need maturity modeling early. So I know that we all get used to the agile cycle of just do something, spin up a little nugget and get it going and then move forward with that and see what happens. But if we end up ballooning parts of our DevOps throughput, and some parts are not keeping up, it's not going to create the value that we're hoping with that investment. So I think it's important, just like DevSecOps, you want to model what is maturity for us so we know how we get there and what key investments we make, and we make those investments in a way that does not bankrupt us halfway there, bankrupt our cash burn, so to speak. And so I think the same thing would apply to AI. Have some sort of, you might be able to start some threads, hey, people are experimenting with it over here, but also starting with, hey, when this is all done, what will AI maturity look like when it's completely integrated into our process at all points at which it's relevant, and make sure that it creates a net positive throughput.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It really does touch on everything we do, both security, DevSecOps, and AI. Guillermo, any key points, key takeaways for our audience as they get started on their DevSecOps journey?
Yeah. Since I run a couple of transformations in this domain, especially for big companies, something that I noticed is like they never start. So they want to start moving into DevSecOps situations, but they start discussing, creating meetings. That is another meeting. So there are a lot of bureaucracy and politics around. That's not going to really take you anywhere, to be honest. So I think what it should be done in that case is, okay, let's define responsibilities and the organization that is going to run the practice of DevSecOps. Start implementing the solutions. Maybe first you might need to do some fundamental learning just to understand what is really DevSecOps and going deeper. But yeah, you have to remove this kind of politics and bureaucracy around it in order to make things happen, because otherwise what you are going to achieve is just starting discussions about, hey, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, let's do that. Then you might achieve certain results, but since the ownership is not going to be really established, you are going to have more discussions, and then somebody is going to tear you down everything that you've achieved in certain areas. So I think the first thing is what we call in DevOps the first flow. Think as a company. So what is good for the company is good for me. Don't think in your hidden agenda, in your department, in your silo. Break it. That's going nowhere. So really act together and define small goals and make them happen as a company all together.
Love it. I think that's great. The best first step is to take a step. Whatever, as long as you get moving. I think that's absolutely what's important. And Rahul, why don't you take us out with the last comment, suggestions for first steps that folks can take on their DevSecOps journey?
Yeah, I think I will want to address some key points, and I would like to just iterate people should really replace DevOps word with DevSecOps. And that's where you actually start practicing DevSecOps, right? Because we talk a lot about security, but we never get started on it. And organizations, they take a lot of time because they tend to bring more people into it, and every new people has a new overview. So I think it becomes important that the company has some kind of, let's say, standards and have some kind of common quality gates across different products that they're implementing, so that people can stop wasting time on like discussing what kind of security rules we need, what kind of scanning we need to do, or you can just reuse the pipelines that other people are already using in their company. So the first thing I think I like, just start introducing security at the very first day into your mindset, and I think you would see slowly, as you said, as we talked about atomic habits and all, I think it will slowly improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Build it into the mindset. That's a great place to leave us tonight. Thanks so much. This has been an amazing discussion. Really, really great input. Thank you for joining us today, to our audience, and a huge thank you to our panelists for being here and sharing your insight. Next up on the DevOps program is how to apply DevSecOps practices in a multi-cloud era. That will be on Wednesday, November 29th, and the registration page will be posted in the chat window. I hope to see you all there. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.